like the name, American elm. I think that says it all. It's a strong tree. The thing about this very special tree is that it has seen so much in downtown Oklahoma City just since the time it was a little bitty seedling in somebody's front yard.
No one knows how it ended up there, putting down roots in a parking lot miles from any forest. It's probably around 100 years old, but that's just a guess. As it grew, it was bent by the Oklahoma wind and should have been broken by the massive truck bomb that exploded here on April 19, 1995. The tree, anchored at ground zero, was only yards away. Now, there is a grandness that has spread throughout. Its branches have embraced every cycle of life, proof that when all seems lost, there can be rebirth. A reminder to never give up on living. A tree of life that daily shares with all its astounding story of healing, resilience, and survival.
I have a real affinity for the survivor tree. I worked in this building and would walk under that tree almost every day for about 5 years. The tree was just an abomination of a tree. It was one big trunk, small other trunk coming out like this, and a few twigs for branches. I'd walk under that tree and I'd think, you are so ugly. Why is this tree still standing? I pass under that tree now. I say, I'm so sorry. You have taught me such a wonderful lesson. It is not what is on the outside, it is what is on the inside of each one of us.
The fact that this tree was able to withstand everything, I think it knew it had something bigger than it was destined to be. In my heart, that's how I really feel the spirit of this tree lived and continues to live.
A survivor tree, I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, but it's a tree that somehow hangs in there when everything around it gets decimated. But I loved one of the phrases that the narrator, or the guy talking there, said. He said, the fact is that this tree was able to withstand everything. And he kind of talked like this tree had a great destiny or some grand purpose, and I don't know about that. It's just a tree. But it's a tree that had a solid root system that resulted in incredible resiliency. But that tree now reminds us that what's beneath the surface is what's actually most important. And the tree paints a great picture of faith, because faith a lot of times undergoes attack in so many ways, and some of those attacks are obvious, and some of those attacks are very subtle and not so obvious. But we all face the struggles of life, but also the struggles of faith. And the struggle of faith can be real. Now, for some, their faith survives. In fact, it actually thrives. The adversity comes, and it just blossoms. For others, that faith just kind of limps along, or maybe it withers and dies. But I'm curious why it's different for different people. Why is it a faith that thrives in adversity for some, and why is it a faith that dies in adversity for others? But more than that, what is it that helps people withstand? And the answer is a word that I'm calling plantedness, which is not actually a word. I made it up, but we're going to make it a word, and we're going to use it as a word for this series. But plantedness, the idea is that some people in life are just planted. They are able to withstand hardship and adversity. They're able to withstand questions and doubts. They're able to withstand seeming inconsistencies and disappointments in life, and sometimes in their faith, they can withstand challenges and frustrations. Unanswered questions, or maybe even unanswerable questions. They face these things and somehow are able to hold their ground They can even take a blow and still flourish. And I love people like that. I'm not sure I'm one of them. Sometimes I'm the one who struggles with faith, if I'm completely honest. I struggle when things don't make sense, when things don't work out like I think they should. I struggle sometimes because faith can actually be a source of disappointment. Sometimes I struggle because faith just seems a little bit far-fetched. Like, really? And I think some of us struggle more than we want to let on, or that others around us realize. I was reading a Christian author back a few months ago, and she kept using this phrase in her book, on the days when I believe. And I thought, wow, that's really honest, isn't it? Because there are those days when it's like, I don't know about this. On the days when I believe. I was sitting in a pastor's group just last month, and we were speaking about and talking about different things, and one of the pastors there spoke, I think, for a lot of us. When he said this, he said, sometimes I'm doing this, and I'm wondering, is this even really real? And that came from a pastor. Because sometimes it's hard to believe, and sometimes it's hard to know what to believe. So what do we do in those situations? We get planted. And that's what's behind the idea of this series. We want to look at some of the things and challenge our faith and say, okay, how can I be planted? So when that challenge comes, I am rooted and secure and able to withstand it. So we read the scripture already this morning, Jeremiah 17. I'll encourage you to turn there. If you want to use the Bible, it's in front of you. In the rack there, that's on page 548. You can use your phone device. But I want to encourage you to turn there because we're going to go back through those verses that I read earlier this morning. As you turn there, let me just give you a little context on what we're going to look at. This is in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a great prophet in the Old Testament, although most people would say that he didn't have a great track record of success. He spoke for God. He tried to call people back to God, and basically the people of his day ignored him and just went about their own way. And it was for 40 years that he did this. 40 frustrating years. We could even say that they were heartbreaking years. His nickname was the Weeping Prophet because he begged people to turn back to God, and they just ignored him. In the book of Jeremiah, there are dozens of prophecies. But unlike some books, they're not aligned or they're not lined up chronologically. They're kind of just randomly placed in there. And so it's a little bit hard to trace through the book of Jeremiah any type of chronological thread. And this passage that we're looking at this morning is very much defined and described that same way. It's called an inserted text. And so there's no debate about its authorship. It's Jeremiah speaking, repeating what God is telling him. And so nobody questions that. It's just like, why did it land where it landed? And it just feels like, okay, we've got this one, we'll just stick it here. And so what that does, though, is it makes it hard for us as we're studying it, because usually when we talk about context, we're looking at the verses that come before, or are we looking at the verses that come after? And the verses that come after have connection. The verses that come before, you're like, I don't even see how this is connected, and I'm not sure they're supposed to be. So there's not a lot of context, at least as far as the scripture goes, but there is historical context. So when Jeremiah was prophesying, it was during the reign, of several kings, but this passage was during the reign of Jeconiah. Jeconiah was the last king of Judah before they were taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And it's a time of cultural deterioration. Things are not going well economically in Judah at that time. They're not going well politically. We'll talk about that in a minute in Judah at that time. They're not going well spiritually at that time. And so Jeremiah is addressing that situation. And it's God speaking, but he's calling the people back to relationship. And in this whole passage here, it's centered around two metaphors. The first one is a bush. The second one is a tree. And so they're used in contrast, and we're going to get to both of them. But let's work through these verses here this morning. Verse number 5, this is what the Lord says. And again, Jeremiah is repeating God. He's not giving a sermon here. He's just saying, this is what God told me. This is what I'm telling you. And he's talking about the bush as we get started here. And he says, cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, whose heart turns away from the Lord. This guy is like a bush. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's look at that verse. First of all, he says, cursed is the individual. And what's meant here by the idea of cursed is that the person who does something is going to suffer because of the choice that he makes. And what he's going to suffer here is a life that just doesn't work. It's like before he even gets started, he knows where it's going to end. It's cursed. It's like he is playing a losing hand. He might take a trick or two, when actually, though, the deck is stacked against him and there's no hope of winning. That's what it means to be cursed. This is a person who thinks that what he's going to do is going to go well, and he's going to find out the exact opposite. It is not going to work for him. Cursed is the individual because of the choices he makes. And what are the choices that he makes? Well, we're told that there's three here, and they're all related. The first one, though, is that he trusts in man. So the choices he makes are based on a belief system that puts man at the center of it, starting with himself. And so this is a word of caution to all of us, that if we want to build our belief system around us, it's not going to work out right. And that's not judgment. That's partly judgment, but it's just a statement of fact is you can't do it this way. You can't live life this way. But we all try because we're all selfish by nature, and we all are really kind of like locked into, I think sometimes, our own thoughts, our own wisdom, our own talents and abilities. And we use those things and we pursue those things, and we face situations in life and we depend on those things to figure them out. Or we just make our pursuit about ourselves, pleasing myself, making decisions on what I want. I had a cousin that I went to college with, and she used to say this, and I still hear this in my mind. She said, well, do you want to know what I think? And I used to look at her and say, no. But she would preface so many things like that. But this is how we can live life. Well, here's what I think. So I face this situation, and here's what I think I should do. And what God is saying in this passage is saying, okay, you can do that, but you need to know where it's going to take you. It's going to take you to frustration, to failure. It's going to take you to this cursed life. And so we can trust man when it comes to self. We can also do this when we trust society. It's not what I think. It's what culture thinks or what expert opinion has to say. And so we can check out philosophy, or we can check out pop psychology, or we can check out things like religion, and we can get people to give us their opinions on how it's supposed to go, or what you're supposed to do, or the approach that you're supposed to take. And what God said here is this, hey, that's not going to work. Popular opinion is still man-centered, and it's not going to work right. We can also see that if we want to pursue celebrities. And we live in a world that is very celebrity-driven and very celebrity-hungry. And we just love celebrities. We love to follow them. And that's in the secular culture. That's also true in the Christian culture. And so we just sit wrapped and say, whatever you say, whatever you think, well, that's what I'm going to say. That's what I'm going to think too. And that's man-centered as well. And as God says, that's heading for the cursed life. And as I mentioned, it's not just like, all the people out there in public. Sometimes it's the people who are in buildings like this on Sunday mornings. And I would say that as a caution to you. If it's just because Brentwood says it, don't bank on it, okay? Because it's not about what I think either. There's another thing here too, and this is actually the context of where Jeremiah is speaking, and that's what I would call geopolitical systems or institutions. So what was going on at this time is that there were two world powers. One of them kind of in the south, and that would have been Egypt, and one of them to the east, and that would have been Babylon. In Babylon and Egypt, they were the two that were kind of going at it and really fighting for world domination. Well, located geographically right between those two was Judah. And they weren't strong enough to withstand either one of them. And so they spent a good portion of time going back and forth between the two of them, either deliberately choosing to align with one of them or sometimes being forced into an alignment. But what Jeremiah is talking is the person who trusts man. It's the nation, Judah. You're putting your trust in Egypt to protect you from the Babylonians, or vice versa. You're putting your trust in the Babylonians to protect you from the Egyptians, and you're putting your trust in man, in this geopolitical system, instead of in God. And we can look at that and we'll say, well, okay, those first three, yeah, I can see where that really applies to us, but maybe not that fourth one. But think about this. As Christians, we live between two political systems in our own country. And they are at war with each other, and they have differing ideologies and practices. And just like Egypt and Babylon, they're based on ideologies that aren't particularly biblical or godly, and they can pull things from there, but they are man-centered systems. And when we say, well, this party or this philosophy or whatever, that's going to be where I'm going to go and I'm going to line up, God is actually saying to us, just like he was saying to Judas, is, wait a minute, you're putting your trust in man. And it needs to be in God. It needs to be in somebody who is actually trustworthy or worthy of trust. And so he's saying, hey, don't be about man. Don't put your trust in man, because it's just going to blow up in your face. It's not going to work out okay. And so he says that, puts his trust in man. He says he draws on human strength. Cursed is the man who, to get through the day, is depending on himself. Okay, I just got to buck up here. I just got to grit my teeth. But this is okay, because this is going to make me stronger. It's never going to make you strong enough to come out the other side in the place that you want to be. And so we trust on human strength. Sometimes we trust on human power. Sometimes we're like, I'm going to make the world, I'm going to bend the world to my will. That's all human strength. And it says finally there, he says he turns his heart from the Lord. So that raises an interesting question when it says this, though. So does the fact that he trusts himself or some man, does that turn his heart from the Lord? Or does the fact that he's turned his heart from the Lord means that he's going to ultimately end up trusting man in some way, shape, or form? Because you got to do one or the other. You can't trust God and yourself. You can't trust yourself and trust God. They're mutually exclusive. And so he has to turn his heart from the Lord. But what would we call this? We would call it idolatry. And I think a lot of times we look at our current culture and even spiritually, and it's like, well, at least we're not like those Old Testament people who struggle with idols. They're setting up these things, and worship them in these altars and these, golden calves, whatever. And we look around the world at some of the religions that we see that all are represented by idols, and we're like, oh, great, at least we don't have those idols. And then we sometimes say, though, but yeah, we do kind of, because we have these things that we worship, like cars, or worship like houses, or whatever else like that. I think, could be wrong, but I think where we struggle with idolatry is right here, where we worship ourselves, where we put trust in ourselves, where we put trust in celebrities, where we put trust in the institutions that we find around us, where we put trust in society. That is idolatry. And what a lot of us are doing is we're hoping, depending, believing that if we can just follow those things, everything's going to be okay eventually. And we prioritize things that aren't really helpful in hopes that they're going to give us fulfillment. We claim to be God followers, but then we value things that God doesn't value, like humility or integrity or kindness. We pursue the wrong things because we think that's going to help us eventually get to the right place. And that's not God's way. That's pragmatism. And those are all idolatries of this day. We don't trust God or what he says. We just think, well, here's my idea. Here's how I'm going to make this happen. And we choose a cursed path. And this was the sin of Judah that would have claimed to be, Judah itself would have claimed to be spiritual and God-focused. We're the Jews. We're God's people. Yes, we worship at the temple. And that's what they claimed, and they're being called out here. And God said, you're not trusting in me. You're trusting in yourself. You are chasing the wrong God. And we can chase the God of self, or we can chase the God of society. We can chase the God of celebrities or the God of systems. But we can't chase those things and God at the same time because they're in opposite directions. And as Jeremiah is calling the Jews back to real faith, he's also doing the same thing for everybody who's read it since. So that's for you and for me. He's calling us back to a trust in God and saying, if not, there's going to be consequences. And he lists them here. In verse number 6, that person will be like a bush. That's the consequence. You're like a bush. You don't have any significance. And the consequence of pursuing a man-centered life is that you ultimately have a life that really doesn't matter. And I think all of us want to have a life that matters. We want to have significance. He says, so you're going to be like a bush in the wastelands. They're going to live in the context of emptiness. Their life is going to be a forlorn dystopian state that really doesn't bring a lot of significance or doesn't bring a whole lot of satisfaction. He says then in the next line, they will not see prosperity when it comes. What does that mean? It means they're going to be spiritually blind. That even when God's trying to do something in their life, even when God's trying to bless them, they don't even get it. And it goes right over their head. And they don't understand how God is even a part of their story. And it says this, then, they will dwell in a parched place of the desert. They will live in a thirsty place where they're constantly depleted without having access to resources. And finally, they're in a salt land where nobody lives. They end up isolated and alone. And there's nothing in this list that's enticing. There's nothing that says, you know what? Boy, I'd really like to be more insignificant. There's nothing that's like, I'd really like to be tuned out spiritually. There's nothing that says, isolation is my favorite. There's nothing in the list that chooses, or that sounds exciting, and yet that's what we choose. We choose the bush life because we live a life that is very centered around what I think, what I want, what my opinion is, or what society says, or what this celebrity says, or what this system says. And here's where it takes you. But, verse number 7 starts out there, but blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. This is the tree. And this is the person whose life is blessed in that it works out like it's supposed to. Not perfectly, but basically life goes okay for this person. And he's blessed by the choices that he makes, and it's this, what? He trusts in the Lord. And that's the difference. He puts his confidence in God. And as a result of doing that, his focus stays in the right place. It's not on him. It's not on the people around him and what they think. It's what does God think? What does God want? How can I best please God? How can I pursue God? How can I live in that realm? How can I live in that space? Verse number 8, they will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. This is the kind of life that I want. Doesn't that sound so much more enticing and exciting than what we just read about? And so God says here through Jeremiah, this is how the blessed life plays out. It's planted, and that's where we're taking our theme for this series. It's planted by the water. But this is a life that is regularly nourished. It finds nourishment. And then when it's depleted, there's something there to replace that. And when it's worn down, it's okay because there's more that's waiting for that. So this is a life that's nourished. It sends out its roots. It's a life of stability. Where it's like, okay, I like that word planted, but it sends us, it's like, so everything can come along its way, but it's not moving. It's not shaken. It's stable. It's also a life, what does it say? Where it says it does not fear, it's a life of confidence. And I think all of us would probably like to have a little more confidence in life. In fact, I think a lot of us struggle with confidence. And God's saying here's where you can find it. You can find it when you put your trust in me instead of all these other things. Confidence. What else is on the list here? The leaves are always green. It's a consistent life. Consistency is part of the blessing of this life. It has no worries. Don't you like that? Don't you wish you had fewer worries? Well, one of the reasons that we have worries is because we're all concerned about, can I figure this out? That's a man-centered life. This planted tree, it doesn't have worries. And I love that. And it speaks to it like a contented life. Like, I'm okay, things are good. I'm not worried, I'm not shaken. And I really like where it says that no worries. Right there in the verse. And then it finishes up by saying it never fails to bear fruit. It's resilient. It's a survivor tree. It's a tree that is constantly bearing fruit and making a difference. And you want to say it's having significance. And it's adding something to the world in which it finds itself. And this sounds like a way better option to me, the planted life. Just trust in God and life will be great, right? Except that's not what it says. And to be honest, this verse has wrapped up in it something that I look at and causes me to step back. Because I wanted to say the cursed life, this is where I choose myself, and here's all the things that are going to go wrong. And that's obvious why it's going wrong. It's because of the choices I made. The blessed life, however, is this: I made this choice and everything is just going, up and to the left, right? Because I made these choices and so everything's going perfectly, except that's not what these verses say. Because if you back up there, it says it does not fear when the heat comes. It doesn't have worries in years of drought. And so I'm left in a little bit of a funny spot here, because I'm thinking the blessed life is a life without problems, and then I'm reading at the same time, no, but the blessed life is a life with problems. And I have this little bit of disconnect. I'm not sure that I totally get this. I'm choosing God, and so that should deliver me from these problems, but it doesn't. And this scenario gives me what I would call spiritual disequilibrium. And that's a big word, but it's another word that probably represents it well is the idea of vertigo. And I think most of you are aware of this, that I struggle with vertigo. And it's somewhat connected to all this hearing loss and whatever else like that. But not only do I struggle with it, I am a medical mystery. And I have dealt with specialists and whatever else like that. And we go through the whole thing and we get all done and they just look at me and go, that's really interesting. But interesting still comes with a bill, unfortunately. But they don't exactly know what's going on, and they've ruled out all kinds of things of what it can't be, but they still don't know what it is. And so we've tried different treatments and therapies, whatever like that. But here's what vertigo is. And you know, kind of definition, dizziness or whatever. But vertigo happens when your eyes tell your brain one thing and your ears tell your brain another thing. And so your eyes are taking in, here's what I see, and my brain's like this, and my ears are here like, this is what I feel, all those balance mechanisms there in my ear. And your eyes and your ears are living in disagreement with each other. And what that does is it makes you very dizzy, and usually it makes you very nauseated too. But this happens in my faith as well. It's where what I think is true, what I think the Bible says is true, and when my experience seems to be something different. When I think I'm doing the right thing so my life should be blessed, and then I find myself in a heat wave or in a drought, and I go like, well, wait a minute, which is true here? And I experience what I would call spiritual disequilibrium. And what happens in that moment is that when I face difficulties in my life, I need my faith to get me through it. But this is different. Because as I face those difficulties, it threatens my faith in such a way that I hope I can get through it and still have some at the end. So instead of leaning on my faith, I'm like trying to keep my faith, and it becomes the struggle that I talk about. So the question is, can I be facing, the blessed life? Here we have it. It's going to come with some trials. Can I go through those trials and still at the end of those trials still have my faith? And that's the question for this morning. Will I be like the survivor tree? Or will I be like some scrubby little bush? I think the answer is yes, I can be like this tree, but with some difficulty. And the answer, though, is in this passage here. The answer is this: first of all, we have to be planted if we're going to be like this tree. What does it mean to be planted? It means to be putting down roots in the right place, to establish permanence, to be in it for the long haul, to say, I will not be moved. I'm going to believe what I'm going to believe. In spite of the circumstances that I'm observing, I'm going to believe it. I'm going to plant myself here. It means to be committed to the unseen. It's faith because we're not certain of it, and that's because we can't see. Things are out of our sights, but we become convinced even of what we can't see, and we're going to be committed to that, the unseen. And that takes place where, not in our circumstances, but it takes place in our hearts. Where we say, okay, I'm looking at this and it's not making a whole lot of sense, but I'm still going to be planning. I'm going to be committed to what I'm going to believe here. And it means then that I'm going to invest in the spiritual. I'm going to seek out God. I'm going to grow boldly, deeper in my faith. I will be invested. So that's what it means to be planted. But how do we do that? Well, the how is woven all through this entire passage, and it's this: we have to trust in God. We have to trust in God. Now, we've used three words here, and a lot of times they are used interchangeably, especially in church. We've used the word belief, we've used the word faith, and we've used the word trust. And they're all similar, but they're not quite the same thing. So let me break this down this morning here. Belief is what I hold to be true. And we all have beliefs, and we all have a belief system. It's what I believe to be true, or what I hold to be true based on things like logic, or what the evidence may say, or what testimony, what people have told me, or maybe it's observation, what I've been able to watch, or maybe it's experience. Or sometimes my beliefs are in the area of hope too. It's like there's nothing here that would suggest this is true, but I just hope it is still. But beliefs are things that we hold to be true. They are our thought system, and we all have one. Faith is what we do with that belief. It's where we believe something strong enough that it actually affects our behavior or we act on it. Which is funny because faith is actually a noun, but we use it like a verb. Faith is the action I take in response to the belief that I have. So the belief that I have is my value system. That becomes my behavior system. And so we look at beliefs, and even if we can't prove them, we're like, I'm going to trust that, and I'm going to take this action. That's what faith is. But here's where we get messed up. So I believe this truth, I think, from God's word, and I take action, and then we have some disconnect, and that's where we struggle a little bit. When our experiences in faith don't match our beliefs, it causes disequilibrium, and the result is that we have to make an adjustment, though. It's when my eyes and my ears are telling me two different things. I either have to change my beliefs, or I have to say I misinterpreted my experiences here. But then there's that third word too, and that's trust. And trust is a full confidence of what we believe, enough that we will act without fear of any negative consequence. We'll just continue to hold to that belief, past the point of faith into this realm of trust. And this is what we're being asked to do in this situation. Is we're taking our belief, we're going to act on it in faith, and we're not going to worry about what our experiences tell us because we're operating in this idea of trust. But the key here is, what is it that we trust? We trust in God. We don't trust in our interpretation of the circumstances or how things are happening to play out. And so, spiritually, we want to say, I want to have trust, but then I look at my experience and that didn't go right. Like, I thought God said for me to do this and I did this and it just didn't work out the way that I was said, and I don't know if I can completely have faith anymore. Maybe not, but you can still have trust because it's not built on circumstances. It's not built on anything other than the nature of God. And what happens, though, is we are in constant evaluation. I'm comparing my beliefs to my experiences, my reality, my eyes and my ears, and I'm constantly making adjustments to offset the disequilibrium. But instead of going to the trust side of things, I have a tendency to go to the belief side of things, and I start to change my beliefs. We hear about deconstruction in the church. That's what happens. My experiences here aren't matching up with what I was taught, what I believe, whatever like that. I better go back and revisit my beliefs. The answer is to go back and check my trust. And hopefully that'll make sense here as we wrap up here this morning. But trust is based on God, not on circumstances. And there's like, well, that sounds kind of funny, but here's my illustration. I have this dog that lives in my house, Rosie. She is a crazy beast. In fact, just this past week, we have a sunroom on the side of our house, and a cat went by, and now I have a huge hole in my screen because she was going to do something about that cat. But here's how it works with Rosie. Kelly and I go away from time to time, and when we go away, Rosie gets taken to Graham's house to stay. Now, Rosie has a lot of confidence in me and trust in me that I will take care of her. But then she goes to Graham's house, and what is her perception? Her perception is that she has been abandoned, that she might never see me again, that her life is over. And yet, what happens? I show up. The reality is that I am coming back, and I have every single time without exceptions. So instead of being freaked out by her circumstances, instead of being freaked out by my absence, she can have trust in my person, that I care about her and that I'm coming back. And this is what God is saying in this passage is like, hey, you want to be planted? Don't be focused on the circumstances. Be focused on the person of God. So, how do we get planted? We trust in God. Not ourselves, not society, not systems or celebrities. And here's what that means. It means we put our full confidence in the person and character of God. And that's going to be relational. Trusting in God means that we take him at his word as it is a consistent expression of who he is. So then we define our experiences on the basis of who God is and not vice versa. So I don't define God by what's happening in my life. I define my life by who God is the point there. And we hold that God, even by his very nature, has our ultimate best interest in mind. He can't do otherwise. He's good. He's kind. He's gracious. He's loving. He's wise. He has to be consistent with his nature. So he knows what the ultimate best is, and he knows how to enact it, and he is required to do so by his nature. That's what trust means. Trust means that we follow then the directives that he gives us, even though it seems risky or contrary to our ideas, our opinions, how we think this should go. And then we accept the hardships of life rather than be threatened by them. We don't necessarily see them as negatives, and they may be negative, but we see them as something that God's using in the bigger, or God's allowing in the bigger picture. And it allows us then, trust is this, trust is wrestling with the incongruities of faith, of belief and experience. We're going to wrestle with those things. We can be honest about that and say, this doesn't always make sense to me. I don't always get this. But we don't walk away. Because ultimately we're hanging on to a God and we're saying, okay, my faith is going to be built on who he is and not anything else. Not what I think, not what somebody else says, not what I experience, any of those things. And so our how of building this trust is actually a who. It's God himself. But there's one more thing here, and that's our why. Why do we need to be planted? It's because our faith will be tested. And this is part of the plan. I want faith to just be easy. Like, okay, I believe God. I want the blessed life, and I wake up in the morning and breakfast is just waiting for me. I go to work and the boss is like, hey, why don't you just take the week off, but we'll pay you. That's how I want my life to be. But the blessed life is not a life without trial. It's a life that's using trial to build faith and to build relationships. And it's a life that's using trial to actually build faith. Faith that will withstand. And that's really our theme for this. Faith that will withstand. And we've used this word today, disequilibrium. Faith that can hang in there even when God doesn't make sense or our circumstances make sense. When I tried it and it didn't seem to work out right, or when somebody's telling me something opposite, I'm still going to go with God. And it's strong enough to withstand disequilibrium. It's a faith that's strong enough to withstand drought and dryness, and we're going to talk about that next week. Maybe a faith that's strong enough to withstand doubt. A faith that's strong enough to withstand detours. And actually, Pastor Mark's going to come back that week and talk about that. It's a faith that's strong enough to withstand discouragement. And Pastor Chris Rulin will be back the week after that to talk about that. A faith that's strong enough to withstand disconnection and distraction and dissonance and disillusionment. See, the testing of our faith is actually a good thing. We need to wrestle with these things because that's how faith grows. And it's not what grows up here above the surface. It's what's growing down deep inside of us, even in the midst of our disequilibrium. It's when we find ourselves in this tension of what's supposed to be true and what seems to be true. What God seems to say and what we seem to experience, of what we believe and what we perceive. Sometimes it all lines up, but sometimes it doesn't. But it's not because God's failing us. It's because God's forming us. And he's forming our faith, and he's planning us. So what do we do with all this? Just some suggestions here as we go into this week. First of all, maybe you just need to put down some roots. Spiritual practices like Bible reading, prayer, journaling, silence, retreats on the back of your bulletin this week, one of our spiritual practices. All those spiritual practices that we've been giving you all year long here are designed to help you put down roots in your faith. And maybe you need to say, you know what, I need more planted. I need to put down these roots in my relationship with God so I can have more confidence in who he is. The better you know somebody, the easier it is to trust them. Secondly, name the disequilibrium in your life. Where are your beliefs and your experiences? Where are they clashing right now? And you can have some honest conversations with God about those things. And start there. Let's say, okay, God, I don't got this. This doesn't make sense to me. Or I tried this and it didn't seem to work. What's going on? You can have those conversations. Maybe you need to do a third thing here. When it's just simply to choose trust, to pick an area of God's character, you say, I'm going to hang on to that. And fourthly, just reject the bush life. The life of self, society, celebrities, systems. It's not going to take you where you want to go. See, here's the final thought, I guess. The blessed life is not a perfect life. It's a planted life. Let's pray. And so, God, we come and we look at this passage and we see ourselves in it. And we see the disequilibrium that we live with. But we bring that all to you when we ask you to help us make sense of it. But when we can't, we just ask you to help us trust you. So our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. Simple questions this morning. First of all, have you trusted God enough to give him your life? To trust Jesus and his sacrifice? That was communion is all about. Have you trusted him enough to ask him to forgive you, come into your life? You can do that this morning where you sit. And I encourage you to do that simple prayer between you and him, inviting him into your life. Maybe you've done that. The next question is, how will you commit to a planted life this week? And we talked about some ideas, putting down roots, naming disequilibrium, choosing some characteristic of God, rejecting something about yourself, maybe a pursuit that you've had. What is the decision that you need to make this morning? Will you make that decision before God? And so, God, we come this morning and we often get blown all over. We endure storms. I pray that you'd help us be more planted, that we would be like a survivor tree. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand with me this morning? Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great series coming up here, looking at all these different ways that our faith needs to withstand. Next week, talking about dryness or drought. You ever get that place in your soul? It's like, okay, I'm doing this, but man, I'm not feeling it. We'll talk about that next week. Invite somebody to come with you. We'll see you next week. Have a great day.